Once again, it is time for the monthly theme video critique. Theme 14 for June was color. My name is Stephen Kirsting, and as always, this is the system I'm going to use for the critiques. First is, does it fit the theme? And all images do fit the theme. I'll discuss artistic and aesthetic considerations in relation to color and the technical considerations as far as how the image was taken. As far as grading goes this month, I'm going to skip that. So let's move on, and I wanted to cover real quick a bit of color theory. Now, we tend to talk in photography about RGB, sensitivity of the sensor, and it correlates to the eye. In the upper portion here, we have sensitivities of a typical human eye. And you can see we have a strong sensitivity in blue, red, towards the lower end of the visible spectrum, and in green. But you see we also have this strong overlap in the center of yellow, and different cameras tend to handle red and yellow differently. They tend to be a little bit problematic because of that overlap. And we can see the same thing is down here in the way a camera sensor works. They're not truly red, blue, or green, RGB. And just like every human eye has different sensitivities, every camera has different sensitivities. Now, the old color theory had three colors, the RGB. Current color theory, opponent process theory, has four, which adds in yellow for the human eye. And we'll look at how light itself works in the processes. All right, RGB additive light is what light does on a completely reflective surface. So we can get all colors plus pure light, white. CMY, or subtractive color, is what surfaces do. We see the color that is not absorbed by the system. And we can get all colors plus black, and in both cases we can get the opposite. If nothing is absorbed, I can get the white, and if there's no light, I can get the black. So everything's possible in both. And talking about the paint theory, RGB used to have blue opposite of orange, and reds and magentas opposite of green. The current process, adding blue in, puts blues across from yellows and greens across from reds. And the opposing colors are considered to be complementary colors. And another way of thinking complementary is they cancel each other out. We divide it along roughly this axis here. We have what we call warm colors, and warm colors transmit to the viewer a sense of energy and warmth. And we call the cooler colors calming. And the two images I took this month and submitted for this month kind of show this polarity. Here I have the image as taken, a red spatula with a yellow egg yolk, and white and black being fairly neutrals, contrasting but fairly neutral as far as color goes. So we have non-absorptive and absorptive. Now in this image, both colors are on the warm side. They're not complementary, they're not opposing each other, they're both from the warm spectrum. So it generates a higher level of energy in the viewer. And then we have luminance, how bright those colors are contribute to greater or lesser energy conveyed. So in the next image, I converted the red to blue. So now we have complementary colors. Because the yellow is opposite of blue, complementary colors, they kind of cancel each other out. So the overall feeling isn't warm or high energy, and it's not cool, low energy. It's kind of in the middle, just a little less exciting than the red and yellow, which stays in the warm, high energy spectrum. So this just kind of to me conveys less energy, less excitement. And that is countered somewhat by the luminance levels of the blues. So they're brighter, so that provides a little more energy for the blue, which conveys to the viewer. Okay, we'll look at the first image submitted for this month, and it's by Helen. And it was taken with a 50mm lens at 1/2000th f7 ISO 100. So very bright scene. Stop down for depth of field, and I don't really see any issues with camera settings. Looking at the image itself, it actually looks quite nice. I would actually have expected a little more noise than this in sky, because that's just typical. So it looks like it was addressed. Clouds also tend to be a little grainy. Check the, I don't think that's quite full-size image submitted, so that's going to help with the noise as well. But overall, I have no issues with the image as such. Right, here we have basically the cool spectrum. We have the greens and the blues, which gives a calming, peaceful impression. We have the brightness level, which is high for both the greens and blues, which makes it a lighter, pleasing impression. And we have a pretty even balance. Compositionally, I don't really have an issue with the horizon line. I do have a little issue with, I don't think these lines are vertical. If I pick one of these, that looks close, and they're all converging, so you want to find the central one and make it vertical. And we could actually twist this a bit. Pick a different line as our vertical. Straighten our horizon line a little bit. And we could shift it to put our primary subject more at the primary 1/3 location. Not that that's critical in my opinion. Looking at this scene, the only thing I think I would do differently is shift the camera position to the right. Here we have leading lines that are just going to the horizon, and I don't have any leading lines over here. So I've picked up leading lines that bring me through the image to nowhere, and to me that's a little counterproductive. I think it would be more interesting if we could have picked up the leading lines here and had them circling around our subject or point of focus for this image. I think that would have provided more interest to the image, and the leading lines would have been more productive than they are over here. Alright, our next image is by Nitin, 300mm at f11, ISO 320, 1/1250th, so a pretty bright scene, relatively low ISO. I know it's a D7200, so that should not be any kind of issue. But the aperture is going to be reducing the maximum resolution of the sensor. It's somewhere around 5.6 for that camera, but probably not 5.6 for the lens. So f8 might be a better choice. And then the ISO could have been a stop lower. Looking overall, we don't have real fine resolution, and feathers in of themselves can be pretty difficult because the texture is so fine. It takes a lot of resolution and lighting contrast to bring them out. So it can tend to look this way, but I do think that the aperture is limiting the sharpness somewhat. A little uh, noisy back here in the water, and that's pretty typical, and I said it as of blues in an RGB sensor. And color wise, we have a contrast. We have primarily the cooler, calming colors with a contrast of the red, the warm color, which brings your eye to the point of focus of the bird right away. So you've got contrast in color, and we have contrast in luminosity. We've got the very bright patch on the neck of the bird. So when you look at this image, right away the eye goes where you want it to the subject and to the eye of the subject. So all that works well for me. The only thing I might do with this image is try to find a way to reduce the number of horizontal lines dividing the image up. We've got this line, we've got this line, this line, this line, and of course the borders at the ends as well. So it seems pretty chopped up to me, and I think just bringing it down to something like this would help. But that puts the head way at the boundary compared to everything else. So we could bring this way in tighter. Something in that area. And I think as far as an image goes, this is a little strong. We've reduced the number of divisions in our image by cropping it tighter. Obviously, the best answer here would have been a longer focal length, I think. All right, the next image is also by Nitin. And same settings, ISO is a little higher, shutter speed is lower, so not as bright a scene, but we have f11, which is restricting, and we go back, yeah, not as bright a scene. It's one stop, two stops, less light in this, and that's going to affect the detail in the image as well, because as I said, you need light to create contrast, and so we can expect even a little less resolution, less detail in the bird, and that's what we see, and it's also kind of apparent in the green. I don't know that processing has caused any of this. Noise reduction could, and if you are doing noise reduction, I recommend always doing color noise reduction first as opposed to luminance noise reduction, because luminance noise reduction, well, let's put it this way, you can go a lot heavier with color noise reduction than you can with luminance noise reduction, and sometimes luminance noise contributes a sense of sharpness or detail. So I recommend doing the color reduction before doing luminance reduction. That way you can retain as much detail or sense of detail as possible. Overall, same kind of thing. Here we've got a strong blue bird with green. We're staying in the calmer colors. We have a complementary color to the blue of orange. It's technically yellow, but it's in that same range. And we have a range of blues, so that works. In this case, it is such a small area relative to everything else, it provides a point of contrast and the same effect as the previous image. All right, the next image is by Glenn, and we have no EXIF, so I can't really speak much about how the image was shot. There's a little bit of noise back here. This is luminance noise, black and white noise, which is not problematic at this level. I'm viewing 100%, so viewed it where you can see the whole image, it goes away. If it was printed, it would go away. So I judge it 100%, but you don't have to be ultimately critical of those things when viewing it 100%. About half size is the best place to judge noise for most uses, particularly printing. Alright, I don't see any issues with the image itself, and I don't see any significant amount of chromatic aberration. A little bit of blending here along the edge, and that's due to depth of field, I believe. Everything else really looks quite reasonable. Sharp. I might like a little more depth of field, I don't know. I think it works well enough as it is. Alright, looking at the image overall in terms of color, we have the, again, cooler, calmer colors in the background and a warmer, more exciting color in the front. And we have complementary colors in the terms of orange and yellows with the blues and purples. So that all works well. Problematically, for me, we have a bit of a conflict in luminance levels. We have the green, which is brighter than our blues. So this area seems a little dull. So this contrast back here, to me, is a bit distracting on the image as a whole. Now, we could crop this in to minimize that, get rid of large portion on the left side, and we could go to hue, saturation, lightness, and we could bring down the green luminance so it doesn't compete quite as much, and that helps pop the focal point area off of the background a little bit. That contrast and luminance. Luminance across the background is a little more consistent now and a little more contrasting with the oranges and yellows, which brings the orange and yellows forward a little bit. And this is also puts our complementary color balance a little greater. Alright, here we have an image by Bradley. We have a 50mm at f3.2, so we're stopped down stop and a half or so. We got 1/40th at ISO 800, which means I'm assuming a tripod. Could have got away with hand holding with a little bit of luck. And ISO 800 a bit high. So just settings wise, this is sky. Depending upon how fast the clouds were moving, you could have possibly gotten away with a tripod, lower ISO, longer shutter speed, more optimal exposure, but I don't think any of those should create a problem in the image. And well, we've got a bit of ISO noise in the clouds. Yeah, a little bit of ISO noise in the clouds, and nothing is 100% sharp. So there may have been a bit of an issue with picking an exact focus point. I think maybe this delineating line and details in the sky, the contrast in the skies, might have been the point which the autofocus chose. I can't say for sure. As far as the image goes, processing wise, I would probably knock the luminance down a bit. This may or may not be problematic. It's certainly not problematic at this viewing size, but because this image is really just about color, we could in fact reduce the luminous noise without really significantly impacting the impression of the image. Alright, here we have exciting colors, the bright and warm colors. So that creates a pop of excitement and energy in this image, which contrasts with the rest of the image, which is lacking color. It's there in the majority of it, but it's subdued because it's darker. And we also have the contrast of luminance. So we have very bright colors against no color or subdued colors. So when you look at this image, right away you go to this location. To me, that's slightly problematic. What I would like to see is more emphasis in this area to kind of balance the image out. Basically, I have contrast but limited area of interest in the image because this area doesn't stand out much and this area is just dark. So if we could bring this area up, I think that would help. And we'll just want to bump the exposure. How's that for obnoxious? Alright, obviously I would not quite do that. Maybe something there. We'll bring up the shadows. I guess that's apparently all of it. Obviously do a better job painting it than I did. There. And we could do something along that line and try not to make it overly annoying. So kind of, we don't want all of our attention in the sky, so maybe something along those lines. So instead of that, something like that, I think helps the image overall. And of course, because of the higher ISO and the amount of noise that was existing in the image to begin with, that's going to make it worse. Basically, I've restored the noise level to where it was before, and depending, I could reduce it further if I chose to. It is pretty much just luminance noise. I don't see any real color noise, and well, that's helped a bit, but it has also reduced the detail quite a bit. Maybe something along those lines. Come on. Alright, I like that image. It's what I call a pretty image. It's colors, sunset, those kind of things. Generally, they're not going to be particularly great images, but they're always enjoyable. And I have no problem with taking pretty pictures just because I like them. Here's another image by Bradley, and here we have, again, we're staying on the cooler side, so not complementary colors. We have the same temperature in general, and this image to me doesn't work quite as well. The main reason being, even though we've got a small pop of color here, we have competing brightness in the background that subdues it. Because these are both in the cool side, I need something else to separate them. I suppose I could go in and take these purple colors and reduce the brightness of them to create a little more contrast. I could take the greens and brighten them. I don't know that highlight recovery is going to do any good. And then maybe bring up this. I don't think exposure is quite the right adjustment, but maybe something along like that is going to help bring it out just a little bit. I think for me this image is a little lacking in that the background is very busy, high contrast. The background draws a lot of attention to the background relative to the smaller point of focus in the image, and it's hard to make that compete. ISO 400, I'm going to guess sharpening caused a lot of this, because as far as camera settings go, this looks pretty good to me, assuming a tripod was used. We got 185 millimeters. We're in the middle of the focal range for the zoom. It's stopped down for sharpness, and we're using a lower ISO and a longer shutter speed. So assuming relatively calm winds and a tripod was used, that seems completely suitable to me. But we have a lot of noise in the background as a result, and that is probably due to sharpening, in my opinion. Now we can address that. We make the image smaller. Let's go to, no, 1 to 3. How's that? There's my tool. I'll make it smaller and grab the brush, make the brush huge, and I'm going to select background. Let me change the overlay. See if we can get all of it. That looks pretty good. Yeah, I was afraid of that one. So undo that one. And then we will take out the exposure and we will increase the noise reduction. And that should have helped some. So we go before and after. That's helped the noise a bit. And it works a little better. All right. Next image is by Hayward. Here we have contrasting colors. We tend to be on the cool side for this image. So we've got the blues, and our blues a little on the dark side for the building. Our reds and oranges are a little on the dark side. This would probably be actually more towards the blue. So we've got this one pop of color that is complementary, so it draws your attention there. Problem there being it's kind of off to the side. This area is a bit heavy in drawing focus as opposed to this, and we could address some of that with a little bit of cropping. Maybe get rid of the fence and out to there. Because we're really focused on the building fronts. And that also puts these people in the pop of red and bright colors here more on a 1/3 level. We have a bit of perspective distortion. Basically the lens is pointed up at an angle a little bit, which is causing our lines to diverge somewhat. And we can go down and see if there's any lens corrections. We can just first we'll apply a distortion. See if we can get those lines to straighten out. That seems alright. And in Lightroom Creative Cloud, the current version, we have transform, and we can use this tool to see if we can fix some of the converging lines. I'll just draw a line here. And I'll draw a second line over here. Use that. Put it right on the edge. Jeez. And then I'll follow it down and put it about the same point on the edge. And that automatically takes some of that converging lines out. So now all of my verticals are relatively straight line. Might not have drawn my lines as well as I could have. That kind of fixes a bit of it. And the only thing I would rather is if the field of view went to the right a little more so that this wasn't cut off quite as bit. So perhaps camera position a little further right so that this was a little wider field of view for the same crop. And if you can back up, you won't have to point the lenses vertically or use a wider focal length. You won't have to point the lens up as much. It will minimize the amount of perspective distortion due to angle and distance. So you could consider using a wider focal length and cropping for your post composition. And somewhere in here, I think it's the scale, you can see what it's done to our image. I'm not sure why I'm looking only to, let's change the offset. Okay. You can kind of see what it's done to our image. Added a little bit of barrel distortion to it and brought the top in a bit more than the bottom. All right, let me back out of that. And so we went from, that's right, it won't let me do crop in the preview. We went from here, which is a nice image, a little unbalanced to me, to here, which is a little better balanced. Brings our people a little more prominent in relation to size to the overall image. And I think this works just a little better. Ideally, I'd want a little more to the right, or perhaps a lot more. If we could get a lot of houses in there, that'd be cool. And last thing, in terms of color, I think we could probably bring down some of these colors. This, bring that down. Bring this up. Just a bit. Yeah, I don't like what it did to the sky. Blue portion. So we'd have to do that separately. And we can do that with a brush. See, we'll bring that down a bit, maybe a quarter or so. Make sure all of that color is covered. Turn off the overlay. And we can adjust that building separately. Something like that. And then go back and bring up the luminance for this area. Maybe even saturation. By bringing up the saturation, it kind of darkens it back down. So I think that works better and really brings a pop to the complementary color, making it stand out a bit more. Personal taste. All right. And that is actually the last image for this month. So until next month when we meet again, once again, my name is Stephen Kirsting, and I hope you have a great July.